With mobile is a little bit tricky because we're gonna do the on Android because Android is open source. Yes. Um, and yes, focus. So Android is open source. What's an open source technology?
That anyone can access and make changes or something like that.
Documentations are available.
What is that?
Documentations are available. Easy referenceable.
No.
Community built.
Yeah, it's well, you could call the word free. It's free and it's supported by. It could be by a company, right?
Yeah.
Like Facebook or MIT. They release a lot of free ones, right? So there could be something that they build and is working out for them. They can make it public for everyone else, right? So Java, the language, is open source language, so you don't pay for it. I guess you can think that way. The software that you don't pay for it, who builds it? It doesn't matter. But if you don't pay for it, it's and you don't have to download it illegally. So that's sort of like that's open source, right? And that doesn't mean no one's supporting it. Like, cause I mean, if they stop supporting Java, it's a big problem, right? So these are either being owned by different companies, but like Android, right? It's owned by Google, but they made the entire platform free, right? So that's one way to think of it. So Android is an open source technology, so it's easier for us to automate the apps. They don't restrict us with like licensing or provisioning, profiling, and all of that. So we're gonna learn how to do Android. As far as iOS, it's more complicated. iOS, without you being a proper licensed developer for that company, you can access it. Like you can work on it, so to speak, right? So even let's say I build an app, and I mean we can try that out later. But I can access it, right? But it's going to be very difficult for you guys to access. So then you have to buy the license, which is not too bad. It's $100 a year. But if you're not becoming an Apple developer, it's a waste of thing. But the concept of Android and iOS is same. But the installation guide is slightly different, and I'll share the installation guide. But I don't want you to focus on both apps at once and get lost in what the main objective is, right? So once you know how to do Android and know how to configure iOS, everything else pretty much the same, right? How do you locate element and things like that? Strategy is mostly the same. Again, if you're going into an environment where they're only looking for someone with core mobile automation experience, chances are you're not gonna get that job, right? Because it's gonna require a lot more knowledge than just a few classes, which is like, and it's also very hard to learn. You have to have some sort of mobile dev experience. Does that make sense? So, but if you have the experience that obviously the majority of jobs are going to be web, right? But if you have that little experience and explain what you know, and they feel like they can kind of train you and guide you, because first of all, it's hard to, there is no one out there called mobile automation engineer, right? There's probably like this very rare amount, because it's a very small, so it's not also, a lot of people are not learning as well, because there's not only jobs for mobile, but if you know how to do web, because Selenium, Appium is kind of extension of Selenium. So it inherits a lot of the functionality of Selenium. So without Selenium, you can't really learn Appium, so to speak, right? You can learn it, but you're probably not gonna be just, know all the functionality of it. So if you're going to be like completely doing mobile, it's gonna require a little bit more edit. I just want you to be, aware of that. But what you're learning here is that if you have to, you're not completely blind either. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's start. I guess we'll start with any questions. So this week, what I want you to kind of really invest is configuring mobile, right? Maybe do some mock scenarios. I'm not going to give you any specific scenarios. Do like a mock scenario. When you come back on next Monday, we're going to do a scenario together and assign you some work for like a following week, right? And then we do that same thing, sprint planning Thursday, right? I mean, we'll go over scenarios on Monday, and then Thursday we'll review some of the work, and then Monday, assuming that you'll be able to submit that and we'll take it from there. I mean, this is just the architecture layer. So you have your test scripts, right? So this is your this is our test, right? So that's what it is in this layer. And this could be sitting anywhere. This could be sitting on your Jenkins server, right? It could be executing it from your Jenkins server or local machines or whatnot, right? And then after test scripts, it goes through another layer, right? Another communication layer, so to speak, right? And this is called Appium server. So Appium is similar to Selenium, but the Selenium is already baked into the browsers. Like when Google or Apple, when they build their browser, they already have a support for those server. But even and that's why you have to download those little Chrome drivers and Greco drivers, right? You have to download them, and that's kind of the communication layer. So you thinking you're doing it on a browser, but it's like a clone of a browser where you're testing it on. It's not like a real browser, right? It's not the browser that you're using, but it's a clone of that browser, right? Because it's not safe for a security reason. It may not be safe for Google to give you the full access to their browser. But so under the hood, it's also doing something similar, but you don't have to explicitly start that server or maintain that server, right? But the case is, but when it comes to mobile, it's different. You can't do that. We have to start that server. So when we execute our test scripts, it first funnels through this communication layer and then translates that message. And you don't have to do any of that stuff. I just want you to understand the architecture. And let's say you're asking, hey, go open an Android device, right? With version 26.0, open this app called XYZ, right? And then click on login button, right? So this message, somehow Appium takes it and sends it to the Android device. It goes to an Android device and then makes that request. So let's say it doesn't find the submit button. It comes back and tells the Appium server, hey, submit button is not available. Make sense? So we're pretty much doing the same thing on the browser. You just don't see it, or you don't explicitly have to maintain that, right? Same thing goes with iOS and emulator. There's one layer they're missing here. There's a layer here called UI Automator, and there is a layer here called XC UI Test. So even for you to communicate with Android or iOS, there's another layer for a specific platform, right? Because there's two different technologies, right? Even though they both serves the same purpose, right? Being able, for you to communicate with apps, but they're built completely different ways. So there's this other layer that, you don't have to worry about it right now, but there is a layer here that's missing in this architecture. And then there's two types of devices, right? One is the real device that you're using, where we can run our test, but we're not gonna go to that craziness. And then there's another layer of another type of device is the emulators, which is, to be honest with you, is 98% the same thing, right? I try to just maybe have like a couple of tests running on real devices just to make like upgrades and this and that, right? But the functional testing, mostly simulators. Simulator emulator is the same thing. iOS calls it a simulator, Android calls it an emulator, right? Don't ask me why, they want to be different for some reason. But these virtual devices, they sit on your machine, so they sit on your network, right? So even though they are very convenient and all that, but they might be, you can also throttle like 3G, 4G, 5G type of testing, right? Mobile testing is very interesting, right? But at the same time, there's a lot of complexity around it, where you really have to understand entire technology, how mobile works. So even if you want to see, let's say, if you want to kind of see your test perform at a certain, how does your app kind of performs at a different network speeds, right? So you can try it with 3G, 4G, LTE, whatever, right? We can throttle it through emulator, but you can only do so much, right? But the real testing will be done through a real devices. But that's like some next level stuff as far as like configuring your real devices, building an entire grid and everything, right? But I don't have it here. I would have shown you something that I built at my current company where I have like about 10 Mac minis and there's like devices connected to it, and then configure all of it and then run the test. So it's expensive and it's a lot of work, right? But you can do that. You might go to a company where they're doing mobile, and that might be one of the things that you can learn and kind of do that. But it is very difficult to teach, right? So I'm not even going to attempt it. Now, what you really want to understand is this architecture, how it works, right? So if someone, hey, can you walk me through how Appium architecture works, so you can at least communicate and kind of go from there. Any questions? No questions. That means either you understood it or...
We can testing the web application with this server, like Jenkins. Yeah. If we have some code, we have at our Jenkins server, and it's automatically done. However, it's mobile testing. We can do like.
You saying if we can run our test from the Jenkins server?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Like the running part, everything stays the same. I'm just explaining the architecture side. How you run your tests, the framework is still the same, everything's still the same, but you just have to change some parameters.
Yeah, but Selenium WebDriver, they have RC.
RC is a very old technology.
How it's working if our machines shut down or something. I mean, like we can put the server, our code, and it's automatically
Let's,
done.
can we close the door? Go ahead.
This knife, we can configure a server, and it's automatically done.
Yeah, the server is always up and running. Well, but I'm saying you're not running it on your machine. The whole purpose of Jenkins is being hosted somewhere else other than your machine.
Yeah, but how it's connected to the virtual mobile?
Oh, well, so those servers, right? So
Yeah.
those servers are not going to be, you can buy those servers as well. So just like your regular AWS servers, we can buy real devices from a cloud service like AWS, right? So it doesn't, I mean, you're not maintaining any of that stuff, but if you're doing a real devices, you have to build your entire grid, right? So, and then we will point it out to those IP addresses, right? And then those IP addresses will, I mean, those computers will always be running, and the old devices will always be connected to that. So it'll be like a server rack. I'll show you a picture. Okay. So, but to answer your question, yeah.
Yeah. On WebDriver, we don't need to.
I mean, you need to. You are still doing it. I mean, it's still going into a machine. There has to be a machine somewhere hosted that's running it. The same thing with mobile devices. We still have to have the machine somewhere that we have access to it, right? And then we have to know what kind of devices are connected to it. Okay. All right. Any other questions? All right. Let's take the next step. Very first thing we have to do is install Appium desktop, right? There's two, we can either download it to a terminal or we can download the desktop version. Desktop version seems to be easier to kind of work with, so we'll just download that. Again, don't Just hold off on it, right? I'll share the instructions as well as, you know, once we kind of done with this, you will have a time to do it, right? Because otherwise you're gonna run to an issue, you're gonna call me, and then it's just not convenient, right? So we'll just go to appium.io, and as I'm doing this, if I miss any step, I'll add it. So once you get here, uh, where is the download? Yeah. It pretty much takes you to their GitHub page, right? And the most latest is this, right? So if you, for, I mean, I'm assuming you guys are at this point using Windows. I mean, if you're using Windows, you're gonna have some difficulties. So Appium Mac 1.3, this DMG file, just download that and go through installation. That's it, right? Nothing else. I'm going to add this here. Okay. And then you have to configure, well, not here, sorry. So that's the first step, and you'll go through installation like any other software, nothing special there. And then you want to download and install Android Studio. Now that's a big file, right? It takes a while. You might be able to download it here, but if everyone tries to download it once, you know, it might be a little difficult, but I'll just share this to download Android Studio. So this will also, I mean, we're not gonna pretty much use the IDE because this is for the people who's building the Android apps. But what we need is the SDK, right? The software development kit. So when we run our test, it knows how to run it on Android device because you still need the entire development platform. Okay, so I'll just share this link.
I can't get the answer to that on Apple Watch.
Okay. So you just go through some basic stuff, right? Nothing crazy here. Huh? You guys have it? Alright, so that's perfect. But for those who wants to install it, you can do that. So then it is very important that once you download Android, what it's going to do is there's going to be a file, there's going to be a directory on your file system called SDK, and this is going to be on this path. You see where it says users, your username, right? So whatever your username is, and then library Android SDK, right? So that's very important. So you have to set these values on your bash profile. Do we know what a bash profile is? We all know what a bash profile is. We've done bash profile. When you build the SSH key, you have to build a bash profile first, right? Okay, everyone just run this command and see what happens. And I'm gonna go row by row so everyone gets a chance to answer what's happening. Open your terminal and run this command and make sure you're not adding extra space or missing any space. Yes. Exactly what you're seeing here. Perfect. Okay, so what we have to do is then we have to create it. So we'll add a step here. It gets 2A. Create dash profile. Now, this is one of those things I can help you create it in 2 minutes, or I can have you try to do it, right? So the reason I would like for you to do it, because sometimes the things that you do every day, it's not going to be all coding related. It's going to be things like this as well. So if you kind of train yourself, you know what I have to create. So bash profile, just to kind of summarize what it is, it's kind of like a config file for your computer, right? You know how you have the config reader for our project? This is kind of like a config file for your computer to understand. So what you're telling your machine is that, hey, this is the location where I have Android installed. So when you run it through a terminal, when your computer tries to run an Android-related program, it knows where to look for that execution file, so to speak. Make sense? So that's why it's important for bash profile to be there. So you will create a bash profile. There's like 1,000 videos online. Just how to create. How you already have it? Okay, so if you have it, it's great. So once you have it, you will dump all of this code in there, right? I would love to show you mine, but I have some secret keys and stuff like that, so I can't show you on this computer. But so most importantly, what you have to do is, so a lot of time, let's say if you're working at a company and you're accessing their servers and things like that, they will give you keys and they will say, hey, add that to your bash profile. So when you run your system, when you run your code from your, like when you're testing it from your machine, it will be authenticated to those servers. So I have those keys right now on my bash profile, so I can share that. But most importantly, what you need to do is it's just a file. What I will do is I will open a file for you, and you just dump all this code in there and save it. Again, and that's I'm assuming your Android SDK was installed in the right location. So when you're downloading Android SDK, I hope you choose the default locations, right? Otherwise, if you have a custom location, that's fine. You just have to give wherever that SDK is. So let's see where that SDK is. Let's do app. When you do open tilde, it opens your directory at a root level, right? Root means at a user's level. So you have your users, and this is our users. You can have multiple users, obviously, but I would also recommend, if you're working on those laptops, I mean, don't do things for. Don't share another. This is with your wife or husband or your kids. It's just have it for work related, because if they have another users, it can alter some other stuff, right? It can break some of your configurations. But anyhow, and you see where that bash profile is. So if you have a bash profile, you would have that available there for you as well. Also, what we really need to go is to the library, Android, and once you download Android Studio, you would have this installed as well. All right, and that's all you need to know so far. We'll get back here a little later. Okay, so let's assume all of these are working, right? And then you'll create an emulator, because we cannot all have real devices right now, right? So we'll deal with creating an emulator. And how do we create an emulator? Well, obviously you open an Android Studio. I'm going to exit out of all this so we can see it from start. And every time, whenever you create an Android Studio, it's gonna bug you for like creating a new project, just create some dummy project like the default one, just so that you have something there. So create Android Studio, and you open Android Studio. So, for very first time, you'll have these dummy applications, right? Just to get to that home screen. That's all we need to get to. We're not doing anything with that code. Once you get there, you see this little icon there with the phone, and then the Android logo is called AVD Manager. So we'll click that AVD Manager. Oh, still doing that. So once we get here, we'll create a new virtual device. Very simple, guys. And then let's say we want to create an emulator for Pixel, right? Pixel 1, 2. I mean, you can also import other ones, but just by default you have this. You can also actually create those Android TVs, wears, tablets. Like I said, the mobile automation is a little bit more complex, right, than the web. But just because of the configuration. Other than that, the working code of it, so even if you go into an environment and if they have all these things installed and configured, you should be fine, right? And most likely it will be, right? So as far as like the logic and everything, that's still like that way we do it for Selenium. Okay, well, let's make a Pixel 2. Create next. And you see how different API levels. Don't download all of them because your computer is gonna get like completely clogged, right? Because these are very big files, right? Just for like demo purpose, I have this 26, level 26, so you guys can also just install that. You don't have to get the latest because you might have some bugs on your Appium. Maybe Appium is not up to speed with 29, then things are, it's gonna be hard for me to debug it. So when you are doing it, just install this. Don't go and install all of this just because it looks like it tastes good, right? So, but just make sure that you just do 26, okay? Because otherwise you're gonna lose your memories. And then next, I prefer you give the name. So Pixel underscore, no space, right? I mean, even though you can create emulator with no space, but when you write it on your script, right, you're going to have to tell, because remember, directory name should be without space because it's easier for you to handle it. Otherwise, you have to do backslash, backslash and all of that on your Java code. So Pixel underscore 2, and you'll do a finish. And now it's creating one for us, right? That's it. I created one. I'm not going to use this one because I have a working one. I mean, you can pretty much use the same one as well. So you just double click it. So this is when your computer memory size and all of that matters, right? So that because you literally spinning up another virtual machine. Like if you ever use like Windows and Mac in the same machine, you're literally doing the same thing. Because if you think about your devices, they're pretty powerful actually. They're just kind of a computer itself, right? So just just to be aware of that. Anyhow, for very first time when you're doing it, it takes a while, right? Because it's loading up to the memory, it's doing all of the setups that needs to get done, and so forth. Any questions while this is loading? Okay. Maybe I can cancel this and open the one that's already loaded. Oh no, it's doing it. It's just like a real device. It just can make calls.
Can we use it except calls?
Can we not ask those questions? I want to be serious today. Let's just get this stuff done. So it's just like all the apps. It's just like your phone, right? You can pretty much emulate anything you want to do with it, right? You can put it on a background. You can like the stack cards of using apps, right? You can do all of that. It's insane, like how much stuff you can do with it. Like I said, 99% of the things you can do that you do with real devices, right?
So what don't need our vehicles?
No, you still need you can walk around with your laptop. It's not convenient. So, any serious questions about this stuff? All right. So these are. So remember, we talked about there's two types of apps. What are those two types of mobile apps? I think you guys mentioned it. Native and web, right? So native apps, like I said, these are all native apps, right? But also the apps that you download from Google Play, right? So if you have Google Play by default is here. So yeah, Google Play you have to probably download this. But so whatever you install from your app stores or your Google Play stores, these are also native apps, right? So like let's say the apps that we're gonna be testing is a native app. And then you have your browser app. So let's say you go open Chrome and you go on your browser. No, thanks.
We can also select the browser we want to open here and run our test.
Was it Google or was it Chrome? I think it was. Or it was Chrome. Okay, so URL. I'm gonna answer your question 1 second. So let's say we've been doing hotels.com. It's telling you to download the native app, right? So let's say you don't want to. So you can still do those. So the locators, chances are, locators are going to be similar. Not same, similar, right? So you still have to use web locators. So you might be asking, well, Mohammed, how am I going to find these web locators, right? Well, this is a very cool thing you're going to learn now. Because you don't need an extra tool to find web locators. But however, for native apps, we need a different tool because it doesn't run on the browser, right? So let's say you go to hotels.com. And we're going to get the same view here, like a mobile view, right? So because the views are different, so the locator ID could be different. So you have to write a logic. If the browser is mobile Chrome, then do something like use this locator instead of the one that you've been using. So like I said, whoever built these frameworks, they're probably gonna have those stuff embedded in it. And then you see this little device thing, or we can toggle it, and now we can say, okay, this is iPhone X. We are dealing with Google Pixel 2, and then just do 100%, right? It's pretty much the same look that we have here, right? So you still have to locate it, but now locator might be slightly different than your average locators that you've been dealing with, right? But my experience, most of the time, is the same. But now you might be missing some buttons, right? So you might not have value that's like, or things that gets collapsed and things like that, right? So those are the logics that you might have to update. But in most parts, you're gonna be fine. Like 90% of the time, similar locator, same locator is gonna work, but there's gonna be that 10% where you really have to work on it. Any questions? So make sure you know how to use this thing because you may have to do automation for mobile browsers, right? So you just know how to make sure you get the right view. Otherwise, if you use the same locators, it's just not going to work. Okay. All right, let's go back to the app. So this is called mobile web browsers. The other one was the native app. This is a mobile web app, right? Uh, it would be silly someone to ask you interview question that, right? For you to get a like $90,000 job. So, but still, you'd be surprised, how what kind of questions people ask. All right, gotta go back to the notes. Forgot what I gotta do. All right, so start the emulator. Oh, the next thing is, well, you might be saying, how do I install a QA build, right? Because if we are building an app and if we don't publish it, you can, how do you get it to your phone, right? So that's kind of the mystery, right? So let's say I'm working on an app, hotels.com. How do I get this app on my phone? Because that stays within my organization, because if only if it passes QA, then we will send it to Google for approval and they will publish it on their store and people can download it. But we have to get these things beforehand, right? Well, the good news is when you work with dev team, there are platforms like there's going to be, right, so Hockey app, Crashlytics, there are different platforms where they will upload those executable files, right? Think of like these apps, packages, right? They'll package the app and they'll upload it on those environments and you can download it from there, right? Or they could just send you the file in Slack or something like that, right? Which is much convenient, right? Because if you're going to upload it in Hockey app, then the entire company gets it. But like maybe if you want to kind of mess around with certain things, you can just build it locally and go from there. You can also build it from the repo. So you can clone the master or whatever working repo of the dev team, right? And they can give you some command that you can run on terminal and it will build the app for you. So you can also do it that way. So there are a couple of different ways, but ultimately you don't have to stress too much about it. Someone has to provide you that. So that's the best part about this, right? So in our case, that's also the case, right? I have this dummy app that we can try, and then we'll take it from there. We'll say documents, test automation, Appium, apps, right? So I have two apps, one for iOS, one for Android. So let's just deal with the Android since we are in the Android world right now. There's two ways you can do this, right? We can there's a command called, once you have your Android configured on terminal, run this command called adb, right? So now, you know how we can do MVN, clean test, or brew this, brew that, right? Similarly, once you configure your Android SDK, you can do a lot of the things from a terminal, right? So you can also install the app from your terminal as well. So you can go to the path of where the app is. In our case, so we'll say CD. And now we have kind of a long weekend. I mean, you might want to kind of enjoy it, but at the same time, like if you want to take a day and just learn like the common bash commands. You know how I'm using like CD, ls, pwd, right? Dot, like those things, like learn like the top 20. That's all you need to know actually, 10 or 20 commands, and just memorize them. And then you can just say adb devices. It tells me the device that is connected to my computer, right? So if you have a real device that is connected to your computer, it will get the UDID of that device and it will tell you that, right? And you can just say adb install and give the app name, right? Right? And then it will install it for us, right? So if we do this, now it's installing it. right? So you get a success here. Obviously, if it's failure, you're not, it's not gonna be pretty. It's just gonna be some red stuff. But then if you go into your app, so this is the app I just installed. It's called some conference scheduler, right? It's gonna be a pain app, but that's okay. You guys are used to working with hard so far. It's taking some time to load, but that's it, right? And that's your app. We'll go through the skip. Let's say we hit the skip button, and then you have a lot of stuff to deal with. You're gonna automate a lot of those cool things, right? But you have to scroll up, scroll down. Um, so it has pretty much all the functionalities that a mobile app has. A majority of the functionality, except for some animation and stuff like that. Um, okay, so that's the app. But let's say if you want to uninstall it, sometime you may have to uninstall it to reset the app state. So you can just, just like you uninstall anything else. So you're gonna just drag it out, right? And then just uninstall it. And you probably have to just confirm it. Another way you can install, which is much more convenient, obviously, you just drag and drop the app to your phone, and it will install the APK. Okay. So there's two ways you can go about installing it. That's it. And you have your app right here. All right. Let's take a quick break. Once you're back at like around, I guess 8 o'clock, we'll learn how to find locators, because you cannot use your browser obviously. So we're gonna use a tool from Android, and they're gonna help us find a locator. It's much easier to find locators. That's a good thing. It's because it's not too many elements that you're dealing with. You only deal with the elements that's on the screen, right? So we'll find the locator, and then we'll run our first test. Native apps, right? Any questions from online? Okay. So let's be back at 8 o'clock, and then we'll start with locating an element.
Most important.
No, they were more important, actually. Yeah, this one you need some guidance, I guess.
I mean, it's configuration. I mean, we have to go through configuration.
So before you leave today, make sure everyone creates at least a best profile, okay? Because I feel like that's one part, you know. If you can't do it, then you can't move forward. So I'll make sure that everyone kind of creates a best profile. That will be a classwork. All right. So let's move on to the next step, which is how do we find locators? Now, there are different strategy of finding locators similar to ID classes and all of that. That we will learn in our next class, right? But for now, let's just figure out how can we actually find the locators. Well, the very first thing you have to do is open the app, right? And we have our app open, so that's good. Second thing that we have to do is we have to navigate to this path, right? So it goes back to your SDK, tools, bins, right? And then open UI automator view, right? So it's just saying go to SDK, and then go to tools and bin, right? So we'll go to tools and bin, and then you see hit this thing. It's called UI automated viewer. So this is kind of your inspector. You know how we had the inspector for Chrome? So this is for Android. And once we get here, we get this nice looking image, like a window, right? And then you hit this Android button. And then that's it. You locate the elements similar to how you locate it using the cron path, right? Unfortunately, it doesn't give you the path by default. So you have to build out your XPath and stuff like that, right? But anyhow, let's say a skip button. So you have your skip button, and you get some details. But the cool thing about mobile, like I said, the locators are not too crazy because there's not too many elements on the screen. And I can only interact with the ones that I can see from the screen. So if you had an element where you have to scroll down, you have to actually scroll down and take that screenshot again and navigate through it, right? So that's one way to think of it. But you see how content, so in here is missing a text, it's missing an ID, right? So it's something called resource ID is what we use. It has a class, but the class might not be very reliable because we can have another button. Like these ones could be also, let's see. These are also buttons, right? These little dots. So we can't really do that. We can write an XPath saying, okay, go click the first button, right? But that's not good. But we have something called content descriptions, right? So we got to figure out how we can use this part, right? So that's what I would probably start with. But if it doesn't work, you might have to start indexing through the buttons because again, the page is not going to have a lot of elements. So I won't be too, I guess, critical of if you use an XPath with indexing the buttons, right? Now, here's the question. So when you work in a real environment, it is highly recommended by the Appium creators, right, that you go and tell your devs to give you resource IDs. So it's very easy to put resource ID in the elements. For a stable test, for reliable test, but you have to make a proper justification. You can say, hey, I can make it work today, right? But for long run, it's not really good because if you add another button here called back or something, then this is gonna break, right? Because we are indexing based on the current state of the app. So I'll recommend give unique IDs and it's more reliable. Unless you completely remove this button, it will always work. Make sense? That's it. That's how you find locators. Right? It's pretty easy. Now let's run our test. Actually, there's a couple of parts, right? We have to first go through the mobile part of the framework, right? Which is, so there's this file, which I don't want you to do anything with it, right? You don't have to do anything with it. It's already pretty much configured. All you have to understand here is that this pretty much sets up all of the things that we, when we create that Android emulator, we set the names, which versions, which environments, all of that. So this is all of that stuff is pretty much set up here. And then if you see this URL, in this case right now, our Appium would be running in a local machine, which is our current machine. So this is the path to that server, right? And we'll get there in a little bit, but for now, and then these logics, you don't have to worry too much about it. But most importantly, this is the core part of the framework, right? Also, this is similar to, like, you know how you have the shared SD, right? But I'm calling it Appium wrapper here, right? Because it's not really SD. It's a wrapper for all of the configurations and everything like that, right? And then if you go into base mobile page, it also has the locators and stuff like that. But these are built completely different ways, right? You see how I'm putting mobile element and all of those different things. But this is for our next class. But what I want you to do is, for homework, I want you to read what's in Appium wrapper. I want you to read what's in mobile base page and see how I built it, because it's slightly different. But can you know, I just want to see if you can understand other foreign code, right? Because you're always going to see foreign code on your code base. So one of the biggest struggle for bootcamp students is when they go into a new environment, like when they see this massive amount of unknown code, they're not able to cope up with it, right? So I just want you to, like, see this foreign code that, you know, you don't have to change, but you have to understand, right? So it will be a good opportunity for you to learn and read about it. Don't make any updates or anything like that, and write down the questions that you're confused about. I think this is very important that you write it down, and you know, you take it from there. Make sense? Also, like, try to have, like, better organizing skills, like what you're gonna do today, what you're gonna do tomorrow. Like, you know, because when you're working on projects, and maybe you work on multiple projects, right? It is very hard for. Initially, I didn't like doing that stuff, right? But then I realized, oh, I'm missing so much, right? Because then you might be working on something you feel is so important, but in a bigger picture, it's really not that important, right? Maybe sending the timesheet is very important at that day, right? So it's kind of like you know, tiny task or something heavy. Just organize yourself, and, you know, you'll be all right. So Trello is it's a pretty cool tool that you can use. So you know how Jira is for project management? This is really good for task management. All right. So on Trello, you can write down the questions, right? On each task, you can add descriptions and stuff like that. So you can say questions for Mohammed or whatever, and then you can write down all the questions you have regarding the framework. Because that's like the new side, unknown side of the framework as of now. So I want you to read about it and try to understand it. But let's just try to run the test. So what your goal for homework is to obviously read the framework part, new part, mobile base page, and also the Appium wrapper page. Those are the two things, honestly. And then also config reader, there are some values that I added, right? But other than that, I just want you to get this thing working. You know, run the test, see if you can mess around with the locators and stuff like that, try to change locators, just to get used to it. And when you come on Monday, we're going to dive deep on actually creating the test scenarios on existing framework and so forth. Where is this thing? All right, so specify cucumber tag on test runner, start emulator, start Appium server, run MVN clean test. But there's one thing I'm missing here is update mobile values. Okay, so there are some values that we have to update in our config.properties. So I'm going to, there's my, let me use this one because this is the one that I already have value sets for. I don't want to keep changing. Right? So we have, this is pixel 1 or whatever. So let's, very first thing, which test do we want to run? I think I only have one test here, which is mobile regression, menu 1, right? What it does is it taps on skip button, and then I tap on menu button, and then I verify sidebar menu is displayed. Are we good? Right? So what it does is, let's see if we have the app here or we can install it. Looks like we don't have the app, right? So we can install the app. Right? It is our app right here. Mobile is very fun if you like to be annoyed.
I guess we're already there.
Yeah. But it definitely adds a lot of value to your resumes and stuff. Like, so I would recommend like you really spend next 2 weeks, like, learn as much as you can, obviously. So, like it takes about 6 to 9 months to hire a mobile test automation engineer because it's just there's not much there. But, I mean, who's gonna do all these things? You gotta learn iOS a little bit. You gotta learn Android, and then you have to learn all this like unknown technology that Google doesn't help you with. All right, so we got here. What I want you to do is, well, what this scenario is going to do is hit this skip button, goes here, hit the hamburger button, and then sees if this is displayed. That's it. All right. So let's run this scenario. One more thing you have to obviously verify. You need to make sure the mobile platform name is Android. If it was iOS, we would have said iOS, right? You have to make sure it's UI Automator 2, right? If it was iOS, it would have said XC UI test, right? Mobile version, that's similar. Sorry?
It must be 2.
Yeah, because the newer version of UI, the under the hood technology thing, Android has. And then mobile version, that's pretty much same. I mean, Android doesn't care. Mobile device, you have to mention which device it is. If it's your real device, you will connect it and find out the UDID for that and paste it here. So it will work on a real device. And then you have to give the path where the APK file is. Where is that Android app file is stored, right? So in my case, it's stored here. I'll share the file with you guys, so you can play around with it at home. So that's it. Once you configure it, but make sure like if you name different, this is different. That's the only thing you have to really be careful. Let's say you did like Samsung Galaxy, right? Make sure you're giving the proper name here, and then also, I mean, API level doesn't matter. I just named it 26. It doesn't have to be named 26, right? Also, yeah, just give the path to where APK file is. I think that's it. Well, the very important part is the second step now. Because let me show you what happens if you don't do that part. So update the mobile specific values. Start emulator, right? We did that. We already have an emulator running. But this step also we can write a script for it, right? We can have a script. It's very easy actually, but I don't want to go through it because it has to it takes a time to install it and create it. So if you have the ABD available, you can add this property as your configuration, and it will, if it's not started already, it will start one for you. Right? Not a big deal. What we really need to do here is that start Appium server, right? Because remember, if we go back to our architecture, if we have it available, going back to our architecture is that we have to start this server. And remember, in the beginning, the very first step, we downloaded Appium, right? So when you download Appium, you'll get this app. And once you get this app, you just hit this. Make sure the host is 0004723. That's by default, so you don't have to touch anything, right? And you just start this server, and then now your app, you have a server. Remember, we didn't do this yet, but when we do REST API, we're gonna do something similar, where we will create our own server, right? And then run it and do the API testing. So think of this as an API, right? This is a service that is running at this URL, which is 0004732. What 000 means is a local host. It's from your own machine, right? So now when you have this port open and we specify this port in our code, I know guys, a lot of details, but I wish it was an easier way to show you guys this, but everything cannot be super easy, right? So then you have to specify where is it stored. Now, you know how we mentioned, like, what if, we're not gonna run it from our machine all the time. Yes, you're right. This is gonna be like maybe pointing it to AWS, whatever, right? Wherever is hosting it from, that's where we're gonna be specifying it. But since our case, we're gonna be running it locally, we have to give the same URL that is running it on here, okay? So next thing we have to do is find out which test are we going to run. So let's go back to our mobile menu features. So it's at menu-1, we go to our test runner. That's usual. Nothing changes about page objects and all of that. That everything stays the same. So now we go into our page menu, and then actually that's already updated here. You find the path, copy the path. Let's just do it here. Okay. And now, well, I'm hoping it works. MVN clean test. I can assure you, you cannot get it working in first try, second try. So just prepare to go through some hurdle. Everyone might face different issue. It takes Android is very easy, but iOS is just a super pain. So while this is happening, it's really good to see the logs, what's happening on the server, right? So remember, this is your communicator between your script, right? So the script was pretty much loaded into that server, and the server is sending the request. So I click the skip button. I think we had to wait, or I had to do something there, but it takes a little time to, I guess, load all of the elements first, because we are using XPath. Remember, XPath is very bad, right? But unfortunately, we had to use that here. Right? I click the menu, I checked it. That's it. As far as the report, it's still the same. What's up? No, you don't do that. No, you do two. It's two different platforms. know.
You cannot run one test on
No. I mean, you can run the same test, but you're not gonna run it this and then that, right? It'll be two different suite. Right? It's like you're saying, can I run web and Android? Right? It doesn't make sense. So you'll do it for, there'll be three suites then. There'll be web, Android, iOS. But again, majority applications not gonna be mobile. It's just gonna be the applications that are consumer facing, like chase.com, right? Something like that would be, but Chase, that's like maybe 1% of entire Chase's applications, right? And like the consumer facing platform, you know, usually like it's like the mobile specific, it's just like a little bit harder to get those jobs too, right? Because that's what's serving their company. They're gonna be very thorough on the interviews and things like that, right? But with that being said, I think when it comes to web, you guys can automate anything, right? When it comes to mobile, there's still a learning curve, but within 2 weeks, let's see where we go, all right? Now, if you're still struggling with web, really just be honest with us, right? Like, it's no point of, like, you know, moving into mobile and wasting really precious time where you can really improve on web, right? So if you're really struggling, just tell Deepak or Asa or myself, like, hey, I'm not gonna do the mobile part right now. I'm gonna keep the recording and everything, and maybe work on it later. Let me just continue to improve on the web portion of it. Does that make sense? But at the same time, like I say, you know, it's still your course. If you want to kind of go with this flow, then it's totally fine with me. Okay, what's the other thing? So that's pretty much how you run it. I don't want to do anything else right now to confuse you more. What I want to do is, for homework, review the new stuff that you've seen on the framework, especially the Appium wrapper, and then some of this new foreign code. So again, like step definition and stuff, all that stuff, pretty much the same thing. But the way we locate element is slightly different. So you see how we annotated before a locator? Like the entire structure is slightly different, right? So I'm not going to explain that today. I just want you to like, you know, get confused a little bit more. And then once you come back on next Monday, you know, just write down the notes. Like ask me, hey, what is this Android find by? Like I am not getting those kind of questions from you guys, like the technical questions that you don't understand. And I feel like this is the opportunity that you have. So when you don't understand, don't expect to know it. Someone has to explain it to you. And this is the phase that we are going through. Like someone senior or someone who built this thing should be explaining that to you, right? But some part of it you should understand, right? I mean, you should still understand that, no, this is a field variable, but this field variable is slightly different than the common ones that we've been using, right? And then, oh, well, this is a method. It's just clicking on that should, that you should already understand. So wherever the gap is, write down those questions and please ask a next class on Monday, all right? So really spend some time studying the new stuff that you've seen, and then, write down the notes. Okay, what I want you to do for classwork is to create that BASH profile, all right? Once you create the BASH profile and enter those Android commands that I showed you, I'll share this file with you guys in 2 seconds. After the BASH profile, I want you to run this command called adb, and you should see something like that. That means Android is configured correctly. Otherwise, it's not working. We have to do something. All right. So give yourself a half an hour try. If you know how to do it, help someone next to you, and then around 9 o'clock, I'll revisit. And if you're still struggling, we're gonna go by group. All right. Everybody online, Deepak is going to help you with the BASH profile. So but at least give it a try next half an hour.